So today is Parquet Day, and over the last few months we've been doing everything leading up to this, getting it, well, as level as possible. Now, I've got quite a few guidelines to follow, and if you watch my last video, you'll know that I tried to check if the floor was all level with a straight edge, and I found lots of gaps, lots of dips where I could slot a pound coin under. Now that is what you don't want. So after lots of trial and error, we got there in the end. And by that I meant several self-levelling and some patch-ups with some cement-based tile adhesive. If you have to do that job, I feel sorry for you. Anyway, we'll be gluing it down with a polymer glue. So the first thing that I've done is I've actually already sealed any dust with SBR. I've treated it with watered down SBR. Once that was dry, we brought in all of the Parquet boxes and stacked them up, making sure they had airflow as well. And we will be putting Parquet in the dining room area, so we've got another box there. And these have been like this for about 3 days. Now, if you remember, we've got storage heaters, so I've had to take the fire bricks out and take the feet out to actually get the flooring underneath. So we've had to use our log burner to get the room up to temperature, to dry anything potentially damp, because obviously we've got concrete on the floor. I think it's been down about 1 week, so we definitely needed the room to dry. And we also brought a dehumidifier into the room and just this, which once this flooring is down, I can't wait to get these radiators back on because these are not necessarily the cheapest. Now we're aiming for a 45 to 65% humidity in the room, and I've got a moisture detector to test the floor, and we don't want really any more than 2%. 0.0%. Oh, now it's going up, 0.2%. That's all right, let's just have a few random checks. 0.1%, 0.1%. I think that is dry enough. I think we're good to go. The other thing that we've had to think about is the orientation of the zigzags, which way they're going to run. So whether they run from the longest side of the room, so the V going that way to the fire, or the V's from the shortest end to the opposite shortest end, which is actually the longest section of the room. But walking through this archway from the living room to the dining room, I just thought it made more sense to have the chevrons, the V's, leading all the way from that end to the opposite end of the wall, which actually becomes the longest section. So it just feels natural to lead you through here. But there's a problem with that. When we worked out the centre of this wall, it doesn't actually line up with the centre of this door, because those two wall areas aren't absolutely equal. But when you line up the tip of the V with that mark, or even the door, by the time the tip of the V gets to the hearth, it's not even centre of the fire, it's off centre. And the French doors aren't square to the room. So we thought, is the hearth square to the room? Because obviously I would like the herringbone to start there anyway, get it central. So what I did was grab my laser level, got it in line with the hearth. Let's just say it's in line with the hearth right now because it took a while. Then I used a continuous line here as a reference to measure the other room, because our biggest fear was anything running out and not looking right here. And as I've measured a few different points of this archway, it differed by about 2 or 3 mil. So that made us realise, actually, we'll start at the hearth, we'll get that central focal point that we wanted. And then another thing that we did, we had the builder's square in line with the laser level there. Then because I'd drawn a longer line, I was able to line my builder's square with that. And when I lined my laser level there, I could then start measuring points from the laser line here. And again, it's like 2 or 3 mil difference. I think we can live with that. So I think we now feel more confident to start from here. We're not worried about things going skewy. And so to get the initial centre line, we've now got the halfway point between the hearth, and then we could extend our pencil line for now. So before I do any off-centre lines, to get my true centre for my parquet, I'm first going to build a bit of the parquet flooring to get a V, and then I'll show you the offset true centre. Now, for those wondering about the flooring I'll be installing, this is beautiful Parquet engineered hardwood oak flooring, kindly gifted from Atkinson and Kirby. They've got many different designs, shapes and finishes to choose from, and after experimenting with their free samples on a mood board, we preferred this Nansen oak for a more natural, rustic look. Each board is 450 by 90 millimetres and 15 millimetres thick. And you'll find some manufacturers have a left and right or an A and B board, meaning there's a tongue on the shorter end, but these don't, making the installation a little bit different. Anyway, I'll walk you through the process as I go, but if you're curious, I've left a link in the description if you want to take a closer look. So this is my baseline, my starting point. I've got to get this right, and then it dictates the rest of it, providing I get my line right as well. So I've got my first V set up. I've placed this at the end because I need the starting point here to reference off to get a straight line that I'm going to draw. That doesn't slot on, so I'm just going to have to leave that there. I think I'm just going to put some masking tape on first, just to keep this row on, and I can cut along there. I'm just going to double check that for a start. Then I can use that corner bit there to that corner bit that I can barely see anymore. Right, I'm drawing that. So that is my first cut that I need to do. So we don't need that piece anymore. To cut, I place it on some insulation to protect my concrete floor while using my Works compact saw with the blade slightly deeper than the wood. We'll use those later. So I've got my first cut to position in front of the fireplace, but this pointy bit is not the true centre of the board. So I'm going to show you how I've worked out the actual true centre of this and made marks on the floor to line it up. Now it might look obvious that this pointy bit is the centre of the parquet pattern, but when you add a new board, it creates a new point. So we need to offset it. And to find that offset measurement, it wasn't as simple as measuring the short end and dividing it by 2. So what I did was grabbed my set square, lined it up with a point on one side to draw a 45-degree angle, then take it to the joining board and lined it up with that point and drew a second 45-degree angle. Then measure the distance between those two lines, then divide that by 2, which gives me an offset of 31 millimetres away from the hearth's centre. So to absolutely know I've done it right, we know that the end of the board is 90 millimetres, divided by 2 is 45. So let's mark that there. Now if you come closer, this is the pencil line that we've got for the centre of the hearth, and if we measure the centre of the board to there, that gives me 31 millimetres. Now it might be obvious, but I had to point that out because so many YouTube videos sent me down the wrong track. So in theory, it'll need to be shuffled to the right to install. So now I know the true centre of the parquet, I'm going to take this away to create a new line so it's easy to follow, which first I use the combination of a builder square and a laser level to mark reference points. Then with Mr. TCD holding the other end, we create a chalk line. Don't forget, it's 31 millimetres away from the original centre of the hearth. Done. But because I'll be gluing it down in columns, and the glue's very expensive with a 30-minute working time, I temporarily added the next board that I'll be placing down to measure and work out where I'd be placing that glue as I went, because too much and I'll waste it, and transfer those same marks to the other side of the room so I could create 2 new chalk lines. Oh, and 3 days later, we got the temperature to 17.5 degrees and 57% moisture. So it's time to get sticky, and we need this little friend gone. Come on, I don't want you having sticky paws. Come on, every video. Oh, I'm heartbroken. So to stick it down, I'm using Proflex Ultra MS Polymer, and it's a flexible wood adhesive. And it's got a 30-minute working time. So I'm only going to glue a section at a time, and then put the flooring down, and then keep working. I don't know how quick I'm going to work yet. The other thing is, when I put my spacers down, I've actually made pencil line here so I don't put glue on there, because I do want to be able to take the spaces out, particularly because I can slot them out at an angle at the moment. I don't want a nightmare. And for trowels, I couldn't find one that the instructions recommended, which is 6mm deep by 3mm wide. So I've bought this Boner one, I don't know if I've said that right, and it is 6mm, but it's a bit wider. And I've also bought this one, which is 5mm. And the reason I bought two is I don't know which one I'm going to prefer yet. I think I'm going to prefer that one, but for any tricky, awkward areas, at least I've got this narrower edge for around the edges of the room, potentially. So I think I'm going to start with this first. And when I apply it, I don't want to go beyond my chalk line, and I need it to be as even as possible so there's no lumps. And it looks very sticky. All right, let's see how it goes. Whew. Right. I'm just going to stick to it. Ooh. See people swizzle it around. Now we'll just stick to the edges first. Each tub should cover about 16 to 18 square metres. We'll see if that's true. And this might dry very quickly. But before I lay my first boards, as required, I added 15mm packers for expansion around objects and walls, but your manufacturers might say 10mm, so double check that. Then line it up with my marks. So it's there. Right. So I've realised I've covered my chalk line, so I've had to reintroduce my laser level to get that in line, and now I'm going to add some more boards just so I know I can meet this again. And it was now just a matter of adding the next ones, gently tapping the tongues into the grooves with a mallet, while also making sure I didn't tap anything else out of line. Although I quickly ditched the tapping block that I made because I kept dipping it into the glue, accidentally transferring it to the wood or my fingers, so cleaning wipes throughout was essential. And also constantly checking all of the joins before I continued and the glue set. I then thought I'd try the finer tooth trowel for a bit of a comparison, as I knew I was meant to aim for 80% coverage of the glue. And while throughout, I give each board a once-over, checking for any wood knots or any other details to make sure that they were evenly spaced out. Yay. I certainly wasn't quick during this project, but honestly, I think that is the best way to avoid any possible mistakes, because once the glue is set, that is it. As I worked my way to the other side of the room, it was more or less a 15mm clearance gap anyway after I put the last full board on, so I didn't have to make any cuts there yet. I also occasionally placed heavy objects on the flooring where I felt it was needed, but I don't recommend doing this too close to the edges, otherwise it can make it very difficult to add your next board on once it's dried, and you'll have to really mallet hard. So that's my first row down for tonight. Now I'm going to go back and just scrape off any of the excess glue so I can put some fresh stuff down tomorrow. And it's gone quite like putty actually. I've also been careful as I went not to get any in the grooves or too much spillage underneath the boards where it spills out. And by that I mean times like these under the actual tongues, which will stop the next board from creating a snug fit. So it's the morning after, and our glue has dried on the first row. So there's no shifting with it, and it's feeling pretty good. So the next thing I want to do is just glue the next row, and then I'm going to continue as I go along. Now I just want to point out, I don't actually have to make a cut around the heart here, because this one is actually an offcut from the very first cut that I made for my triangle. We'll allow hands in here for a little bit. But instead of doing a chalk line this time, I'm just making a couple of marks of where the end of the next plank goes, and I'm going to line it up with a straight edge and start gluing and sticking them down. But I've got to start from this end here because it's going to be too tight getting it in over there, and let me show you why. So I've got those two in already, just temporarily, but if I try and get those in, I'm going to be fighting all the time. So that's why I'm going to start over there and work my way up. I will show you later how I'm going to do these cuts around any obstacles and the room itself, but I'm going to get the majority of them down and then do the cuts in a big batch. And that's if you don't have a chalk line. I'm just drawing around this one in case I don't make the cuts today. And if you do have a chalk line, let's use it for the other end. There. I've got to say, out of the trowels yesterday, I did flip between the two, and my favourite really is the Boner one, the 6mm deep. I feel like it's more likely to touch the wood rather than the other one, even though it's only a millimetre. Don't worry, Hans wasn't in here for long, but as I went, I regularly used my right angle, checking for square in case I'd knocked it out when any tapping was needed. Also, something you'll notice, my newish work trousers got dirtier and dirtier by the day, and this was probably one of the worst parts of the job, the glue's sticky mess. But I didn't want to wear gloves because it's hard to know which digits have glue on them, and in the past I've ended up adding more on places that I didn't want. So I'd wipe my fingers regularly on my trousers, as always. But you could opt for a floating floor system by adding underlay and gluing the tongues instead. But if your floors aren't perfectly level, you could end up with some bounce, which was something that I was afraid of. But after 2 afternoons of gluing and getting headaches 2 days in a row, from now on I had to wear a mask. The pain just wasn't fun. And I didn't want to open the doors and let the heat out, especially as it's cold outside and we had no radiators on. So I'm on the start of my 3rd afternoon on this job. And the trouble with doing it in parts, you end up having to scrape the adhesive off before you can continue. But it is much easier to scrape this stuff off while it's dry because it turns into a rubber because it's a flexible adhesive. So yeah, I'm scraping off the excess before I come back later to do extra cuts. I won't do this immediately. I'm going to continue gluing the rest of the room over there. But the other thing is, you might be wondering, there's no A and B or left and right boards to these. These are more universal boards. And that's because there's no tongues on the shorter ends. Anyway, I'm fine with that because by the time you've clipped them all together, they're secure and I'm gluing them down. The only time I'm run into a little bit of trouble is, for example, over here. There's no tongue here to clip onto that, and so when I want to come back and add more later, I found it's actually easier for me to just to put some spacers in to line them up rather than one dip in and then struggling later. Also, I finally used one full tub of this stuff, which we think is about 16 square metres, which is about right. So we've got plenty to do, well, we should have plenty to do the other room as well, because this is the biggest room. And now I'm starting on the other end, working my way to the hearth, and I'm not sure whether I'm just going to continue this way and then add more around the other end of the room, or when I do a second row, I go straight into here. But I think I'd like to see the majority of one room finished first, just so I can feel like I'm getting somewhere. The other thing is, don't get rid of your offcuts, which is probably obvious. We've got a little pile over here, and that's from the original triangle that I created, and I have done the odd cut just so I could continue. So, for example, I did one over here because I wanted to add more rows and not feel trapped. So I'll show you the cuts later. But these two here were actually from the offcuts from the first one that I created. But this is another example. So I know that I've got a tongue going into my groove over there, and I've got a groove here going onto the tongue there, but there's nothing to link those two together. So I might just makeshift something to slot in between those two, or maybe cut a little packer, just so I know when I do glue it up, it's going to be at the right level. And then I'm going to have trim all around it anyway. I'll deal with that later. Also, you might be wondering why I've not continued to go up there. And it's because this obstacle is in the way. And if I put that in there when it goes in, and I do make a cut, I know I've got to cut a bit of this off in line with the height of this, but I just wanted to make sure I had plenty of wiggle room to make sure I could slot them around the tongues, and then I could put that in after. That's the only reason. I probably would have been all right, but I didn't want to put myself in that predicament. Why did that not go in? No, it does. That panicked me. I've also found occasionally I've got glue in the tongues, just a bit of excess glue, and I've had to clean them out. But I've done that before I've even started to continue gluing up. The other thing is, I've got my knee pads on and they are saving my knees, but because I'm constantly down, I've noticed like circulation in my legs. So if you're doing a big room, it's a bit annoying. I think my legs are going to feel a bit restless after this job. Anyway, I'm going to continue this. I've got my chalk line down, and then I've got to start working around the hearth and then up there. The other thing I've noticed is once the middle bit was done and it was secure, I've been flying through it so much quicker, but you absolutely have to keep your eye on it all the time to make sure there's no gaps. Even just walking on it, one of you is walking on it and you might have just separated the join. That's the thing that's taking so much time, is not just laying it, is just checking back and forth every area in case anything is slightly out. But before I start cutting pieces around the hearth, I needed to trim the excess off my metal tile trim. To do this, I used one of their free samples for the depth, or you can turn a board upside down, and used my multi-tool which sat on it, and then I trimmed it down. To work out where to cut my 45-degree miters, I'd take the longest measurement, and don't forget to take off your expansion gap, and mark it on the end of the board and use my roofer square to draw the angle. But something I did regularly if I was ever in doubt of any tricky cuts was just use scrap cardboard first to make a template to prevent waste. The flaps from the packaging were actually the same size. Then I cut them with my Works cordless miter saw and check to see if they fit. Or sometimes a quicker way that I'd work it out without measuring is use 2 pieces of cardboard, one with a miter end, and then extend another piece until it's the same length as the cut that you need, and then position that on your board and draw it to cut. But this was almost vital for really awkward obstacles, where you could nibble bits off the cardboard if needed just to get it right. For cuts like this, or miters on really small pieces, I ended up just using my bandsaw. It was so much quicker and easier, and on the very early cuts that I did, I found a jigsaw would rattle the wood, making it really slow work, and a handsaw was far too slow, particularly when you've got hundreds of cuts to do. And it definitely pays off to do dry fits around obstacles, because I found if I glued the other pieces down first, I wouldn't have been able to slot my cut under my towel trim, and this would have been the same with architrave, so I know I'll have to fit that first when gluing and shuffle it back for a snug fit before the glue goes off. After doing all the cuts I need for now, I then start gluing them down with the help of a pull bar and a mallet. I had to keep moving back and forth to lay them in a sequence without trapping my boards. But actually, I found it easier to keep my eye on them, making sure they were all consistently square. So I've extended to the sides, but right now I don't feel comfortable just carrying on going like that, because if I put that one in there and then that one in there, I've got to somehow wedge that in. So I'm finding it a bit tricky where I go there, then I have to start over here again, So I'd probably go like that, there, then there, and it's a bit of a juggling act. But another thing is, every now and again, I keep catching myself out like, whoa, like I nearly put a groove against a groove, because you're focusing on the tongue going on this side. But if I actually did that, it would mess things up. It would make it less structural. This one here, do you remember I put a spacer in one of them earlier, just so I could make sure these lined up, because obviously there's some give there, but there won't be until I overlap it with a tongue into the groove. If I've laid them out right, it's only the very end ones before I do my final tricky small cuts around the walls. Everything else is tied together. In a way, it's easy because I can just grab any board. I don't have to have systems, and hopefully that will make it easier for offcuts towards the end. I've got to keep checking to see if I've not pushed it too far there. That looks okay to me, but I have checked those earlier. I also get into the habit of checking with my right angle to see it's fine. Do you see this? So that, I don't know if I had a spacer in this one, but it's slightly raised compared to the other. And I've also found that these have a tendency to drop, so sometimes I've got to lift this up, and it's not really an issue there because I've got that. Oh, and that should raise that, and that knocked out. Also, every now and again, I found that the boards just want to lift up as the floor is going. Now that could be the floor isn't completely, not level, but there's a gradient. So every now and again, I've been putting a dumbbell towards the bottom, just so I know that glue's got contact, but I don't recommend pushing it down too much, because if it's too tight, you'll end up having to mallet in the next board if it's set. And I've had to do that a couple of times, and it's just not fun. It's hard. And I've got to be very careful with this stuff now, because it's the last amount that we've got, and we've got 2/3 left, which I think will do it, but I've got this section here and then all of the sides to do. So I've got another tricky cut to do here, and I thought I'd show you how I did it. I pushed the plank as far as I could up to the wall, obviously making sure it's square to the other boards as well, then measured the distance from the edge of the board to the opposite one, then added more to that measurement for the expansion, and marked the same on the opposite side to draw a straight line. Then I put it back to mark where the end of the wall protrudes, then draw a 90-degree line and two 45 degrees off that centre line. If your wall's not 45 degree, you may need a sliding bevel for that. And if in doubt, I'd make a template to prevent a mistake, especially as we were running out of boxes and every board at this point counted. But before I stick it down, I needed to scrape a load of old glue off. Oh, I've got all my full planks down. It needs a good tidy up, but I've now purposely left the cuts to the end. So my plan is, come over here. Because we're not entirely sure we've got enough planks to complete the job, we think it's going to be a bit tight. What I've decided to do is focus on the bigger pieces first, the bigger offcuts, and leave the really piddly ones till last. Now firstly, I'm trying to get a load of cuts done first, so then I can just do a whole gluing session. So as I showed you before, I've been measuring, using templates, and I've cut and planned around here. So these are temporary. I've just temporarily stuck them together, these awkward cuts, and I've used the bandsaw for really tiny cuts just to keep my fingers safe. So I'll be dismantling that later, gluing that down. But if you remember, when we started, we put some together, we drew a line, and I cut it with my little compact saw. And the great news is we can do that again for some of them. So we've done that here, and the offcuts from those I was able to reuse so I could create it there. And the reason we can do this is pure luck, because the spacer is roughly about 15mm, and we're going to be putting a piece of trim there anyway to cover the clearance gap. We've not been so lucky with some of the other areas. So to keep things simple and less confusing, I'll just be cutting around the wall. Alternatively, you can build them using up some of the many offcuts you'll end up with. And because I need this piece, I'm cutting on the outside of my pencil line. And with every cut I say, please fit. Some people get all the best jobs. So you can see I've done all of the cuts for all of the bigger areas, like the triangles all around. And they're just positioned at the side, waiting to do a whole gluing session. But we still don't know whether we've got enough yet. So what I've done temporarily is, for the threshold area, I've just tapped these in for now. They're not glued down, they're just temporarily in. And we may, very likely, put some doors here later. So I want to make sure that we're going to cut them and put the threshold in the right place. So I've got 2 offcuts from an old door frame that used to be here actually. We don't have the right threshold. We've got a selection over here, but what we need is a T-bar, but they're all attached with this plastic tracker. So what I've decided to do is just do a bit of a mock-up where a door frame would be, providing the doors would be opening inwards, making sure this is plumb with inside of the room. And I've marked halfway between the recess and then positioned the tracker between that. And for clearance, I've given myself 5mm from the actual tracker. It could be 3 to 5mm is what I've heard online, but I've read various things. So I've marked that either side, and now we're going to draw a straight line. And once I've dismantled them, I can do a load of repetitive cuts on the miter saw, and hopefully these offcuts can be used elsewhere. We really, really need to utilise all of our offcuts right now. Otherwise, we've got to make an order very soon and get that threshold and some more glue for this room. Oops, let's correct a doubled up chalk line. I'm just temporarily putting these in so we don't trip over them, but we're not going to glue them down just yet. We've got more cuts to do. This is just to give you an idea. This is totally the wrong threshold, but I'm going to place it over there and it just conceals it nicely. So with those offcuts, hopefully we'll be able to use them over there. So it's been a few days of cutting. All of the cuts are done now, and luckily we had 2 full boards to spare. So I've taken them out, and now I'm going to glue them all the way around, a whole big gluing session. But right now it's feeling like all the hard work with the self-leveling has finally paid off. But I'm going to start over here. Oh no, we can't have this. I don't want that in my glue. So when I did open this glue after a few days of cutting, I realised some of it had set. So we may not have enough. I'm crossing my fingers. Anyway, I've done quite a lot of the triangular spaces. I've done there, but I want to carry on here to finish this threshold area. And then I'll carry on with the rest. But I've drawn a straight line this time. And we know we're not going to lose a load of glue to having to scrape it because these are mitered. So that is the line for our threshold. Come on, come on, come on, come on. Stop down. Oh, we've upgraded the bed. Although it's got some paint marks we've got to take off. Got to get those off, haven't we, pal? Come and have a look over here. So I've done it. Every bit of flooring is down apart from this piddly corner. I ran out of glue. Well, I had a bit left, but it was so thin that I was worried about what I did put down wasn't actually touching the board, so I thought I best stop. So Mr. TCD had to go out and buy 2 more tubs, really for the next project, and the threshold that we need. So I'm not going to glue this down until we do the next one, because I don't want to open it and then have some go off. I don't want to waste any. But we had to travel an hour and a half to the nearest stockist. So we'll leave that there for now. It does fit. Come on, there. At least it's out of the way. No one can step on that. But wow, I don't know how many days that was. And I was actually starting to see parquet patterns while I'm trying to go to sleep. But it's so cool. The biggest concern I had was whether the glue would be good enough, because I do want to do exercises and stuff in here, but if you jump around, it's not going anywhere. My microphone might have been noisy then. We had to take this radiator off because I couldn't get under to one of the boards. So once we sort out the skirting boards, then we'll be putting those back. We've also now got a really nice piece of oak to go on the lip where the cavity closer is. I can't wait to show you that soon, but let's explore around the other room. I just love how tidy my lines are all around the room, but I can't wait to see what it looks like with the skirting board on, covering all of the cuts. But we just can't decide on the type or the colour. Would you go for a white skirting board for it to pop against the colours, or an oak to blend in with the floor? I've never gone for an oak one. I've always just had cheaper white ones that I've painted in MDF. But whatever we decide, we'll sort out all of the trims around the hearth and the French doors, probably in that video. I just ran out of time, and if I just kept going on and on, you'd be another week or 2 without a video. Also, I was talking about that threshold. It's the twin one here. So this is the one we got in the end, if Hans will let you see it. And we've got the tracking piece there. It's obviously too long for this area. I need to cut it down, so I won't do that yet. Well, hopefully you get the idea. It slots over there, and then we'll be adding this plank next, also from Atkinson and Kirby. And I just love how smart it's all looking. I can get a taste of this hallway already. It's all the same thickness as well, 15mm. Exactly the same type of oak, Nansen oak, it's just a different pattern. We're going to run it this way because when we had a bit of a play running it the other way in the long hall, it just looks stupid. And definitely order at least 10% more than you think you'll need. And these are all the offcuts that we ended up having left over. Maybe there's a project I could do with this. Maybe a parquet coffee table. Just like that offcut tile coffee table idea that I had in mind. Might look a bit rubbish if I did both of those. But overall, I am really happy with how it turned out. I couldn't see it initially because I was just in the thick of it, just covered in glue. But I love how it just flows into the room. Nothing looks skewed as we were worried about. And it feels cosier and more homely. And you know, Hans is in his elder years now, so I want to make sure it's cosy for him as well in front of the fire. So very soon we'll be sorting out a sofa, getting the TV on the wall, yes, obviously skirting board, and this will be our office space, not actually a dining room. So we'll be moving our office out of the kitchen into here. Anyway, if you do anything differently, as always, please let me know below, but hopefully my tips and experience was helpful. And yeah, I'm going to get some rest and then I'll continue that and the haul very soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.